Welcome to this week's edition of Remember That Show, where I dive deep into our past and pull out a show that we all remember and give you a little bit of a bio. This week, as you can tell, is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, often called Mr. Rogers, is an American half-hour education children's television series that ran from 1968 to 2001. It was created and hosted by Fred Rogers. Its original incarnation, the series was called Maestro Rogers, debuting in Canada on October 15, 1962 on CBC television. In 1966, Rogers moved back to the U.S. Maestro Rogers' Neighborhood on Regional Eastern Education Television Network. The U.S. national debut of the show occurred on February 19, 1968, and it aired on NET and its successor PBS until August 31st, 2001. The series is aimed primarily at preschool children ages 2 to 5, but it was labeled by PBS as appropriate for all ages. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was produced by Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Public Broadcast WQED and Rogers' nonprofit company Family Communications, Inc., previously known as Small World Enterprise prior to 1971. The company was renamed the Fred Rogers Company after Rogers' death, later renamed again to Fred Rogers Productions US of 2019. In May 1997, the series surpassed Captain Kangaroo as the longest-running children's television series. That record that held until June 2003, when Sesame Street beat Mr. Rogers' record. The series could be seen as reruns on most PBS stations until August 31st, 2007, when it began to be removed by many PBS stations, and was then permanently removed from the daily schedule by PBS after August 29th, 2008. 11 years after Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood concluded, PBS debuted an animated spin-off, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, a 50th anniversary tribute and PBS Plague Drive show hosted by actor Michael Keaton, who got his start on the show titled Mr. Rogers, It's You I Like, premiered on PBS stations nationwide on March 6, 2018. In December 2023, Variety ranked Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood number 89 on its list of the top 100 greatest TV shows of all time. The series had its genesis in 1953 when Rogers and Josie Carey joined the newly formed public television stations WQED. On April 5th, 1953, WQED debuted The Children's Corner, a program featuring Rogers as a puppeteer and composer, with Carey as host and lyricist, in an unscripted weekday afternoon live television program. It was on this program where many of the puppet characters and music were used on later series were developed, such as King Friday, Daniel Tiger, and X the Owl. It was a time when Rogers began wearing his famous sneakers, as he found them to be quieter than his work shoes while he was moving about behind the scene. The show was briefly broadcast nationally on the NBC television network. Rogers moved to Toronto, Ontario in 1961 to work on a new series based on the Children's Corner called Maestro Rogers, a 15-minute program on CBC television. Maestro Rogers aired on CBC for about 4 years. A number of set pieces that he would take back to the US, such as the trolley and castle, were created for the Canadian program by CBC designers and with producer Bruce Admich. Most importantly, Rogers appeared on camera in the new series rather than appearing through puppets or characters. Fred Rainsbury, head of children's programming at CBC, got Rogers to appear on camera in the new show after seeing him interact with children. Ernie Combs, one of the Americans who Rogers brought with him to help develop the CBC show, would remain with CBC on Rogers' recommendations. After Rogers returned to the US, Combs first appeared as Mr. Dressup on the CBC program Butternut Sauce, conceived and produced by Aldridge. Combs then later helped to develop what became Mr. Dressup, which ran for nearly 30 years as an iconic presence on Canada television, ending in 1996. In 1966, Rogers acquired the rights to his program from CBC and moved the show to WQED Pittsburgh, where he had worked on the Children's Corner. He renamed the show Maestro Rogers' Neighborhood, which first aired regionally in the northeastern U.S. through EEN, including education stations in Boston, Washington, D.C., and New York City. The 100 episodes of the half-hour show incorporated the neighborhood of make-believe segments from the CBC episodes, with the additional reality-based opening and closing material produced in Pittsburgh. The series was cancelled in 1967 due to lack of funding, but an outpouring of public response promoted a search for new funding. In 1967, the Sears Roebuck Foundation provided funding for the program, which began on September 21, 1967, for the first national season. The first national broadcast of Maestro Rogers' Neighborhood appeared on NET stations on February 19, 1968. In 1970, when PBS replaced NET, it also inherited this program. Around the same time, the show had a slight title change to the more familiar Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The show was broadcast from February 19, 1968 to February 20th, 1976, and again from August 27th, 1976 to August 31st, 2001. The final episode was recorded December 1st, 2000. The studio, WQED in Pittsburgh, in which the series was recorded, was later renamed the Fred Rogers Studio. During each half-hour segment, Rogers spoke directly to the viewer about various topics, taking the viewer on tours of factories, showing experiments, crafts, and music, with interacting with his friends. Rogers also made it a point simply to behave naturally on camera rather than acting out a character, stating that one of the greatest gifts you can give anybody is a gift of your honest self. I also believe that kids can spot a phony a mile away. The half-hour episodes were punctuated by a puppet segment chronically occurring on the neighborhood of make-believe. Another segment of the show consisted of Rogers going to different places around the neighborhood where he interviewed people to talk about their work and other things that focused on the episode's theme, such as Brockett Bakery, Bob's Throws Workplace, and Negro's Music Shop. In one episode, Rogers took the show behind the scenes on the set of The Incredible Hulk, which aired on CBC from 1978 to 1982. At the start of each episode, the show logo appears as a camera pans slowly over a model of the neighborhood, as the camera goes from neighborhood to inside the Rogers TV house. From 1979 to 1981, an alternative version of the opening sequence was used. Beginning in the early 1980s, the neighborhood model included a small version of the neighborhood trolley as it crossed several streets from left to right on a model train track. This is the same model electric trolley that later in the program would transport viewers into the neighborhood of make-believe. Usually the camera goes from neighborhood to cut on the porch, where the viewers see Fred Rogers coming for a visit before he enters the house. After the camera goes from neighborhood to inside Rogers' television house, Fred Rogers is seen coming home with his jacket on, singing, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" He goes into the closet, takes off his jacket, hangs it up, and grabs a cardigan zipper sweater to put on. After that, he takes his dress shoes off and grabs a pair of blue sneakers to put on. One of Rogers' sweaters now hangs in the Smithsonian Institution, a testament to the cultural influence of his simple daily routine. At the end of each episode, Rogers sang "It's Such a Good Feeling." A different song, "Tomorrow," was used in 1968 to 1972 when he took off his sneakers as he says, "You're alive," in a higher toned voice, and grabbed his dress shoes to put back on, and then snaps his fingers 2 times. After that, Rogers goes into the closet, takes off his cardigan, hangs it up, and grabs his jacket to put back on. Before the closing credits, Rogers got ready to go out the door by reminding the viewers, "You always make each day a special day. You know how? By just being yourself. There's only one person in the world that's like you, and that's you. And people can like you just exactly the way you are. I'll be back next time. Bye-bye." During the closing credits, which is complete with the opening sequence pan shot where the neighborhood trolley crosses the streets right to left. Starting in 1979, episodes were grouped into weekly series with each series focused on the same topic in the form of Mr. Rogers Talks About. Rogers' monologues throughout the week explore various facts of the topic. An ongoing story from the neighborhood of make-believe series serves as illustration. Rogers covered a broad range of topics over the years, and the series didn't shy away from issues that other children's programs avoid. In fact, Rogers endeared himself to many when on March 23, 1970, he dealt with the death of one of his pet goldfish. The series also dealt with competition, divorce, and war. Rogers returned to the topic of anger regularly and focused on peaceful ways of dealing with angry feelings. Beginning in the 3rd season, Mr. Rogers always made a clear difference between the real world of his television neighborhood and the fantasy world of make-believe. He often discussed what was going to happen in make-believe before the next fantasy segment was shown, and sometimes acted out bits of the make-believe with models and on a table before the camera transported to the live cartoon puppet reaction. The miniature motorized trolley, which was known in character form as Trolley, with its accompanying fast-paced piano theme music, and which was operated by Rogers with its left hand working buttons and controls hidden on the side of the bench which Rogers usually would sit, was the only element of that appeared regularly in both real world and make-believe. It was used to transport viewers from one realm to the other. Rogers, however, was mentioned from time to time in make-believe, mostly by Mr. Feely, who appeared occasionally in make-believe segments and seemed to form a link between the two worlds. The idea of a trolley came from Rogers. When he was young, many trolleys operated in Pittsburgh, and he liked riding on them. This reality fantasy distinction put Rogers' series in a sharp contrast with other children's series such as Sesame Street and Captain Kangaroo, which freely mix realistic and fantasy elements. The series featured Picture Picture, a rear projection motion picture slide projector whose screen was encased in a picture frame. In early episodes, Picture Picture would show various films or slides at Mr. Rogers' command. After the material was presented, Mr. Rogers would thank Picture Picture, to which return "You're welcome" on its screen. After 1970, Picture Picture no longer operated magically, becoming merely a projector. Mr. Rogers would insert a film, slides, or videotape through a slot on the side, then show the material using a wired remote control. When Picture Picture was not being used, a different painting would display on the screen. Often it would display the words "Hello" or "Hi" at the opening. The neighborhood of make-believe is a fictional kingdom visited by Mr. Rogers during the show. Characters were portrayed by both puppet and actors. Fred Rogers was a puppeteer for a great number of these characters. Michael Keaton made his first television appearance as a volunteer in 1975. He played an acrobat in a group called the Flying Zonkaneers that performed for King Friday's birthday, and he was also in charge of running the trolley. 13 in-series operas took place during the course of the series, within the make-believe segment. Many of them featured American baritone John Reardon as main character. The operas would encompass the entire episode and would be seen after a brief introduction by Mr. Rogers. Guests on the series range from cellist Yo-Yo Ma to actor and bodybuilder Lou Ferrigno of The Incredible Hulk. A 1968 visit by electric music pioneer Bruce Haddock resurfaced on a 2004 documentary, Haddock, King of Techno. Guests on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood were often surprised to find, although Rogers was as gentle and patient in life as in TV, he was nevertheless a perfectionist who did not allow ad-libbing. He believed the children were thoughtful people who deserved programming as good as anything produced for adult television. Rogers appeared on some other series. On the children's animated cartoon series Arthur, for example, Rogers plays himself as an Avok, like Arthur. Later on, Arthur appears as a guest in hand puppet form on a 1999 episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, in the neighborhood of make-believe. Bill Nye hosted a science-themed program, and Rogers exchanged appearances on each other's series, as did Rogers and Captain Kangaroo. Rogers additionally appeared in an episode of Sesame Street, where he explains to Big Bird that even if he loses a running race, such as the one Big Bird ran against his friend Snuffy, no hard feelings threatened to break the two of them apart. Big Bird himself also appeared in one of the episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, in the neighborhood of Make-Believe, when he came to deliver his entry to the Draw the Neighborhood Art Contest. When Fred Rogers died in 2003, PBS website provided suggestions to parents on how to respond to children who ask about his death. The song Won't You Be My Neighbor was written by Fred Rogers in 1967 and was used as the opening theme for each episode of the show. In the Canadian province Ontario, the show was broadcast on TV Ontario from 1970 to 1989. Those broadcasts could be seen in the U.S. cities close to the Canadian border. On March 6, 2018, a prime-time special commemorating the 50th anniversary of the series aired on PBC, hosted by actor Michael Keaton. The hour-long special also featured interviews by musicians Yo-Yo Ma, musician Isaac Perlman, actress Sarah Silverman, actress Whoopi Goldberg, actor John Lithgow, screenwriter John Apatow, actor David Newell, producer Alan Dorer, and spouse Joanne Boyd Rogers, as well as clips of memorable moments from the show, such as Rogers visiting Coco the gorilla, Margaret Hamilton dressing up as the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, and Jeff Egler in his wheelchair singing It's You I Like with Rogers. Fred McFeely Rogers was born March 20th, 1928, and passed away February 27th, 2003. In 1969, Rogers testified before U.S. Senate Subcommittee, which was chaired by Director Senator John Pastor of Rhode Island. U.S. President Lyndon Johnson had proposed a $20 million bill for the creation of PBS before he left office, but his successor Richard Nixon wanted to cut the funding to $10 million. Even though Rogers was not yet nationally known, he was chosen to testify because of his ability to make persuasive arguments and to connect emotionally with his audience. The clip of Rogers' testimony, which was televised and has been viewed by millions of people on the internet, helped to secure funding for PBS for many years afterward. So that concludes this week's episode of Remember That Show. So again, this is a weekly video every time, same time. So if you happen to have any memories of Rogers' Neighborhood, let me know in the comments below. That'd be great. And also, if you have any suggestions for future shows, they are always welcome. So, like always, hope you enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, keep on collecting. Bye.